Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the eTrailer base plate on a 2024 Ford Maverick. When it comes to flat towing any vehicle, there's going to be a minimum of 5 main components that you'll need to have to properly tow it down the road. And starting on the vehicle side, we have our base plate, and that's going to structurally mount to the frame of the vehicle, creating the point to attach your tow bar to tow your vehicle down the road. The tow bar is going to be the connection point between said base plate and the hitch on the RV. Now, just like pulling a trailer, you're also going to have safety cables, and that way, if we were to have a disconnect by not properly hooking up, those cables are going to keep everything together. But also, if you have a catastrophic disconnect, everything was to fail, you still have a breakaway switch for your braking system, and that's going to be required to keep you safe and legal. And worst case scenario, if this cable was to pull, it's going to apply the brakes on the towed vehicle, and that way it'll bring it to a slow and eventually a stop, so it's not rolling down the highway. We also have our diode wiring, which will transmit the light signals from the 7-pole on the RV to the taillights on the towed vehicle. This is also going to be a requirement on some braking systems to be able to tap into, but that's going to cover all of the main ones that you need. Now, some vehicles you may want to pick up separate things like a charge line, and that's something that you might want to pick up for your Maverick, so it'll trickle charge it as you go down the road. Now, the eTrailer base plate can hook up to a number of different tow bars out the gate. So with this design, our Blue Ox works directly with it. Demco and eTrailer tow bars are also going to work with this. So if you have that configuration, you're good to go. But if you have a Roadmaster tow bar and you want to adapt to this, you're not going to be changing out the arms on the base plate, but you'll be attaching different attachments on your tow bar. So if you're picking up a new tow bar and you have this base plate, if you don't have a Blue Ox, Demco, or eTrailer, you are going to want to pick up that tow bar with the Blue Ox or Demco ends. That way you can pin it in. Now, something that's going to be important that you're going to want to take in consideration before setting up your flat tow is measuring the hitch height on your RV and then comparing it with our measurement here. From the ground to the center of our pin, it's going to be coming in at 14 inches. So doing the same thing on the hitch on the RV is going to determine whether or not you need a rise or a drop to be able to get that tow bar nice and level. And we try to keep it within 3 inches, higher or lower, and that way it's nice and level. It's going to tow safely down the road. So here they have a high-low adapter that just drops this down to get it nice and level. So it's going to work out perfectly. They could have almost gotten away with not having this, but they already had it. So I do like how level this is. Just make sure that yours is going to be the same way by making sure that you don't need a high-low adapter or getting the proper one to get it level. Now, this base plate does a really good job of putting the arms and your safety chain loops right in the pocket, and you are going to have to get a little bit creative when mounting up your other components. This one really doesn't have a whole lot to work with. They give you a bracket, and you kind of have to get creative as far as getting that mounted up, where some other brands are going to offer mounting points for your diode wiring as well as your breakaway switch, which sure makes this a lot easier to do. This is still a good base plate, and the installation's very easy to get done. It maybe takes you, I would say, give yourself 3 to 4 hours, but it's definitely an installation that you're going to want to do at the same time of your other components because you're going to be pulling the fascia off on your truck, and it sure makes it easier to get all these wires ran cleanly. So for those of you that watch the video and decide, hey, maybe this is beyond my scope, maybe you don't have the place to do it, the tools to do it, or even the want to do it, you can use our dealer locator to find someone close to you to get your base plate installed. But if you are truly doing this on your own, well, I'm here to help. Watch the video, and I'm going to point out some tips and tricks to make sure you get your base plate installed properly. And before we begin our installation, something I'm going to recommend is if you're going to be doing your base plate, the fascia is going to be coming off, and it's a really good time to get your breakaway switch or any other flat tow components installed at the same time. It makes it a lot easier to route all your wires nice and clean rather than trying to feed them with that fascia back on. So it's not 100% necessary to have the fascia off to do it, but it sure makes it easier, so I do recommend doing this all one go. So to get our fascia removed, to get our base plate installed, it's going to start with the hood open, and we're going to find some plastic push pins as well as some 10mm screws. On our radiator support, the plastic push pin, there'll be one on each side, and there's a slot that's going to allow you to either use a trim panel tool or a flathead screwdriver. Just pry up that center, and then you can pry out the bottom base. It should come out one piece. If not, if it separates, just make sure you have both of the pieces. And something I'll recommend too is we're going to be taking off quite a bit of hardware here. So if you have a nice organized spot to keep all of that hardware, it'll make reinstallation a lot easier just having it organized. So I have those taken out. We also have 4 10mm screws across the top, so we'll get those taken out as well. With those plastic push pins taken out, this section can come off and we can separate it from this rubber boot. It just has some tabs on it, so it's flexible enough. You should be able to just pry this off, and this is going to give us a little bit more room to work here. So if you get that tab popped off and the one on the top, I think that should make it a little bit easier. And we can set this aside. Now, from this step on, for the most part, whatever we do to one side, we're going to be repeating on the other. And we're going to head to our wheel well, where we're going to find some plastic push pins as well as some 7mm screws. So we'll need to remove generally this one up here right past where the fender meets the front fascia. So these plastic push pins, just like we had at the top, you're going to pry those sections out. There's also one on the far side on this underbody air dam portion right in front of the tire that's back here. There's also going to be these 7mm screws on that as well. So 3 of the screws and then the rest of the plastic push pins going up along this fender liner. Now we'll head under the front portion of the fascia, and where the underbody panel meets the fascia, we're going to have some T30 Torx bits. So you'll see they're kind of in pairs. There should be a total of 8, so just work your way down getting those removed. We're also going to be taking off these screws around this front portion. Those are going to be 7mm, just like we had on the back side of these, so we can get those removed as well. Now at each of the wheel wells, you're just going to peel back the wheel well liner from where we got those plastic push pins taken out of, and where the front fascia meets the front fender, there's going to be 3 10mm screws that feed in kind of following this angle. So the head of the bolts you can feel. There's also going to be some plastic tabs here. So first we'll get the 10mm taken out. I kind of used a combination of a swivel with a 10mm. You can get to some of them with a socket and ratchet. It's a little bit tight here, but get all 3 of those taken out and then repeat on the other side. Now we're getting close to getting our fascia pulled off, and what we'll do for just a little added protection is I run painter's tape along the fascia and the front fender edge, and that way as we pull this off, but also as we put it back on, if it rubs against any of our clear coat or paint, it's going to give it a little bit more protection and keep the vehicle not scratched in the process of getting the base plate installed. Now is also a good time to set aside a spot that you can put your fascia to where it's not going to be scratched, especially if you're doing the rest of your components. You're going to have the fascia off for a little bit of time, so making sure that it's going to be safe. You also want to grab an extra set of hands because this is going to get a little bit cumbersome. Having 2 people really makes it a lot easier. The first thing you're going to want to do is start to work on each side, and you probably notice when you pull the screws out it starts to droop down a little bit. We have a little bit larger of a gap, but there's a plastic clip that keeps this snapped into place kind of where my finger's located, and it's kind of tricky to get to. So what I'm going to do is grab a pair of needle nose pliers so we can pry on and pinch down those tabs, allowing us to draw this down. Now what I've found, you'll see the clip here, it's got snaps on the outside edges, and so if you keep pressure pulled down to where you can have a little bit of a gap, I use a plastic trim tool. If you don't have one of these, if you have an old card, whether it be a gift card or something along those lines, if you push in there you can push on that tab and you'll feel it kind of drop down, and then from the inside you can use your fingers or that same tool to kind of pinch this together. But be very careful. This is holding that up there, and the corrugation that's along this plastic is very easy to damage. So make sure that you're getting that popped off before drawing this down. So I'll get the other side prepped just like this as well. So at this point, we're gonna get our fascia removed. I got Ryan helping me here. And you gotta be careful because this plastic trim that goes on the headlight is actually snapped into place. So what I recommend, if you grab your fingers and just kind of snap back on those, you don't wanna pull back too far and obviously crack any of the plastic. But if you can get that snapped off the headlight, that's a good sign there. And then where we remove that cover, you'll see these plastic tabs here, and they can be a little bit tough. So what you'll want to do is push back on the tab, and that's going to help slide this out. And then as long as you keep pressure, you get both of those out. And if you have those headlights popped off, there's a few more clips, but we can draw our fascia back. And don't pull it back too far because you may have electrical connections like we have here on our passenger side. So we'll get that separated by just pushing down on the tab and getting the clip popped out. And then you can set your fascia aside. Now with our fascia off, we're going to get our pedestrian alert device taken down. So it's going to be this device that you see here mounted up with an 8mm screw. And this is to alert passengers, being that it's a hybrid, it's quiet during low RPMs. So this is going to be in the way. Our base plate eventually is going to bolt up into this area. So we'll just loosen this up for now. And you can choose to unplug it. Or you can just simply let it hang down. There is a tab here that holds it in place, and it looks like there's a metal tab back here. So if you just slide this back, that should be fine for now. Now we need to do some trimming on the air dam section that goes right in front of our intercooler, and that's going to allow for the base plate to run across. So we'll see out here I have some painter's tape, and I've marked out roughly where we're going to be cutting. The outside portion is rubberized, and so if you need to, you can use just a utility knife here to cut that portion. But when you get to the plastic, I would highly recommend using a cutting device. I have a multi-tool, if you have a Dremel, something along those lines, because if you try to use just like a pair of snips, a lot of times that plastic is, it's kind of brittle and it'll crack, not in the way that you want it. So multi-tool works really good for this. We're gonna notch this out, and then I'm gonna come back with the file and clean it up. So if you just follow this edge, and then where I've marked out, we'll do that on both sides. Now where we removed the bolt for the pedestrian alert device, we're going to be right in this area on this outside of the air dam. And this plastic portion, this little wing or gusset, I guess you'd call it, we can cut this out. And again, this is just to make room for our base plate to eventually bolt up. But you'll see that there's some back ones here. So again, having a cutting device that really gets through this nice and easy, like the multi-tool, is going to be key. We may need to also do it on the other side. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. That way we have some clearance. This is going to be something that you're not going to see or structurally cause any issues. So having that trimmed out will just make it prepped for later on. So I'm just going to run up this edge and kind of get this portion knocked out. And if you want to, I mentioned you could just leave the pedestrian alert device hanging, but this gets in the way. There's just a tab on here, so we'll just unplug that to make sure it doesn't fall in the way as we're cutting. Now we'll grab a 15mm socket, and I do realize that removing that pedestrian alert device is going to be a lot more helpful just to give us space, because right where it kind of was mounted up, you'll see this stud with a nut on there, and we're going to have one on both sides. We're going to be reusing that nut later on, so keep that in a safe place, but we'll get this removed on this side and then repeat on the other. Now with a 13mm socket, we're going to remove these bolts, and these are pretty long here, and we're going to have them on both sides. So we will be reusing these to get our base plate raised up immediately after, so you can keep these handy as soon as you get them removed. Now's a good time, if you have that extra set of hands that help you take the fascia off. Getting the base plate up can be a little bit tricky. It's not too heavy, it's just a little bit cumbersome. It makes it a lot easier with another set of hands to kind of get that in place. And when we do raise it up, we're going to be taking these bolts and running them back in to hold it, but we want to make sure that we put thread lock on here. This is included, and this is going to be just because we're using the base plate as a source of a lot of stress to pull the vehicle down the road. We want to make sure that over time bumps aren't going to loosen up our hardware, so putting a little bit of thread lock on those threads is just going to help. And from here on out, any of the hardware that we're going to be putting on, go ahead and put some thread lock on there. And when raising your base plate up, it's a good time to see if there's any clearance issues that you may need to take into account before bolting it up. But you'll see on our bracket, we have the 2 holes on the bottom. That's going to go where we just took those bolts off. So if you just hold this in place, everything should be pretty clear. Now, granted, it's very tight on this whole area by the shutters. That's to be expected, but making sure that it can actually bolt up is going to be a big part of the equation here. So with this kind of raised in place, I'll grab our bolts and just start hand threading them in. And generally, if you just get one started with a few threads on each side, that'll help support it. So if you're doing it by yourself, this is a good way to do it. And if you're getting resistance, move the base plate around to make sure that bolt is going in directly. It should thread in by hand fairly easily. Before I snug anything down, this is supporting itself. I want to get everything else kind of loosely in place. So each of our brackets, we have 2 of these. They're going to go on that stud, and we'll be using that nut that we removed. I did put some thread lock in here, and I'm just going to loosely put this on. And that's going to allow us to get our other hardware hand tightened in place. So you can see there's a gap here, but as I draw this back and tighten it, it's going to close that back up. So let me grab my other hardware and we'll get this in place. Now for our next step, I will recommend, I'm going to snug these down just to draw it in. You don't have to get it super tight, but at least to keep this from bowing out is going to help us get our bracket in place. And on each side, this bracket is going to bolt up where that factory stud was, where we took the nut off, and then bolt up to this hole. So what we'll need to do is get thread lock on that nut, and we'll get this in place. I'm going to just loosely thread this on. We want to have a little bit of wiggle room to get the other hardware to bolt up to the base plate. So what we'll do is grab our bolt, we'll put thread lock on it with a flat washer. And then you're going to want to grab a handful of extra washers too, because as we pass this in, we're going to want to put 2 of them in between our bracket and the base plate. And then we'll finish that up with a flat washer, split washer, and a nut. And with this in place, we're just going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. With all of our hardware loosely in place, now it's time to start snugging it down. And I would start with the 13mm bolts on the bottom. I don't have the factory specs for those or the nut up top, so I'm really just going to go off of making sure it's tight with hand tools. I took them all off, so I roughly know that they're not on there that tight, but we don't want to over torque it. and cause damage. So use your best judgment there, snug it down, and having that thread lock is also going to help keep that in place. But when it comes time to this portion where we bolted it through, we are going to want to use our torque wrench and the torque settings found in the instruction manual. So in order to accomplish that, on the head of the bolt, it's going to be a 5/8 ratchet, and that way you can hold that, or I'm sorry, a 5/8 wrench on the head of the bolt. I like to torque down on the nut side. It's a better way to torque things down properly, and that's going to be an 11/16 socket. So I'll get my torque wrench dialed in here. And if you don't have a torque wrench, you can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. But this is going to make sure that you know, it's going to be up to spec of the manufacturer to make sure that it's tight enough to tow your Maverick down the road. So we'll get these both torqued down. And it's kind of an awkward angle with this base plate, so you may have to go with a short 5/8 or 11/16 socket to get this properly torqued down. And before we get our pedestrian alarm back in place, we're going to get our cables wrapped around the base plate and then wrapped around a supporting portion of the frame. This is something that you'll see on eTrailer base plates. Demco does this as well as Blue Ox, and it's just the last line of defense. If for whatever reason all your hardware was to fail and this was to pull forward, this cable should theoretically keep that base plate attached to the frame of the vehicle, and that way it's not disconnecting. So as far as routing it, there's a few different ways you can do it, but I really like to make sure that I'm wrapped around the base plate and then around a structural part of the vehicle, and we'll be using quick links to attach it. So I'll get this routed and then show you how I did it. Now the way I've attached mine, you can obviously see the quick link that kind of sits in this pocket, and all of this can be zip tied up. Again, it's just last line of defense, so if it's going to be in the way of anything, feel free to zip it up to keep it a little tighter. You obviously want to make sure it's not going to catch anything that's moving, like a fan or anything like that. But I just looped around, and this portion here, there's an opening. I was able to wrap that around once and then back through this area behind our bracket before quick linking it together. So we'll just repeat that same step on the other side. Now in the instruction manual, they have you enlarge the hole on our pedestrian alert system, and that's to apparently bolt it into our base plate. I don't have a hole there, and I'm pretty sure we aren't supposed to use the mounting portion, so let's get creative. We'll find that we have these two holes up here underneath the bumper beam. Pretty sure that's going to give us a good spot to get this bolted up. So just make sure it's plugged in, and you may have to source your own hardware here with some large washers just to kind of account for that space, but the main thing is we have it solidly mounted up. So if you source your own hardware and get this bolted up, it's roughly in the same position that it was from the factory, and it shouldn't cause any issue by being bolted up here. So at this point, we've officially installed our base plate. Really all that's left to do is get the rest of our flat toe components set up. And as you can tell, having this nice and open as you run your 6-pole wiring, your breakaway switch, you can start tucking that in nice and clean and get clean pass up in the engine bay with that fascia off. Now it does come with this bracket. I really try my best not to self-tap into base plates just for structural rigidity. It's minor, but you know, I try to find good mounting points for this to get everything mounted and be strong enough to be able to plug that in multiple times without it becoming loose. So you may have to get creative with this bracket. You could use this bumper beam and maybe do some bending, but the big thing comes down to when you put the fascia on, having it in a spot that you want. So you may want to mock that up a little bit before determining exactly where you want this, but getting this mounted up means that it's going to start, you know, really becoming the center spot to have your wires start to run. Makes it a lot easier to kind of get everything laid out. So I'll get all my components set up. I'll show you how I ended up getting it mounted, and then I'll show you how to get everything put back in place, and then you'll be ready to rock. Now I got my flat toe components all set up, and the last time we talked, I was going to try to find a good way to get this mounted. I really tried to not self-tap into the base plate, but this base plate in general, they don't give you a whole lot of great options. So I did end up drilling through. This is hardened steel, so self-tappers got to be really careful. They can snap off. And even with this bracket all the way out, it was really tight here on our 6-pole. I was able to also get our breakaway switch mounted up on the other self-tapping screw. Now, with that being said, this base plate will do just a fine job of getting your vehicle down the road, but if you're doing this installation yourself, this is definitely a time suck. The Maverick overall is a fairly easy truck to get set up in terms of other vehicles for a flat tow, but mounting things gets really tricky because you want it secure, you want it to be able to be clean, so sometimes you're left fabricating. If you're not a fabricator, you want to just kind of bolt up as you go. I would highly recommend taking a look at the Blue Ox base plate and the Roadmaster base plate. They also stay nice and clean in the grill, but they give you all those mounting points, which just makes it a lot easier. There's no guessing and having to really try to mock it up because you just bolt it up directly. So again, at the end of the day, not a bad base plate, but just be prepared to kind of get this mounted up. It's a little bit trickier than some of the other ones out there. So at this point, we're going to grab our fascia and we're going to line this up just to kind of get everything mocked. And what's cool is on the Mavericks, these plastic tabs that we popped off, these are going to be a great way to just kind of lightly hold this in place. You don't have to snap it in all the way. Now, you may have some clearance issues with some of your components down here. So if that's the case, we'll just come down and take a look where we're having issues. And this is designed to sit in the grill, so there's no trimming on this portion. It really comes down to just wherever you have your 6-pole and breakaway switch mounted. That's why those other base plates, they have the stems that come out here and a tab that's going to put everything to where you don't have to trim. On ours here, I am going to be cutting out this section to kind of make room for all this. I don't know if I'll have to trim this. We're going to see, because as I start to draw this in, hopefully we'll be able to slide this right in between. It'll look nice and clean, but we may have to kind of notch a little bit of this out. So what I recommend doing is if you have a permanent marker or a paint marker, you can start marking out where you need to cut for sure, and then start trimming out as necessary until we get this to fit. So with all of that trimmed out, it turned out fairly clean. I did have to notch a little bit here and there, and I couldn't leave this section. So really take your time here, make it as clean as you want it to be. Something else that I'll recommend is making sure that you have enough clearance to be able to get your 6-pole plug in. So it gets pretty tight here on the license plate, but I think this will be enough. If you need to, you can always bend that down, put it at a slight pitch, and that way you can get that plug in. Once you're happy with it trimmed out and you know that it's going to fit well, now you can start putting everything back together in the reverse order that you took it apart. Just make sure that you get your electrical connections put back in place. And that was a look and installation of the eTrailer base plate on a 2024 Ford Maverick.